Most trading education out there will go ahead and tell you the top line number or the target to hit, but very few of them will actually go ahead and ask you the questions that really matter, the ones that determine whether you make money or not. And in this study, we're aiming to answer these three questions. Let's go. So the questions that I wanted to ask, and they're specifically around the reclaim and retest claim, if you will. And we're asking is if we just call the target, is that enough? And what goes on once we call the target? Is the path to the target tradable enough to give you an edge? And what does price actually do? So those are the questions that we're going to go ahead and answer in this little study. And in order to do that, what I did is I created a entire, I call it my quant research lab. And just so you know the validity and what we went through to build these data models is this is the data types that I use. So I test both Forex and futures, and then I use really high quality data for both. And then my studies really center around these fundamental questions. What does the market actually do what does it actually do? So when we make a claim and we say this happens, does it really hold out to be true? What the market state appears to do, and then what does price do next? And then what does price do after it does that thing? And then what does it keep doing? So we build a data model around that, and then we determine, is that actually tradable? All right, so that's the context to give you a little bit of the backstory. And for this particular study, remember, we're talking about a claim and a retest, or a break and a retest, whatever you want to call it, reclaim or whatever, that we actually did test 68,000 reclaim events across all of these six Forex pairs. So it just was not, I back tested 100 times or anything like that. We tested 68,000 events. So it was about, on average, probably around 10,000 events, a little bit more for each of these pairs. And then what I did after I built the study and I looked at the findings is how I validated it was by rebuilding the study and comparing both. So I didn't just say, let's look at the output and revalidate the output, but let's rebuild the study and compare it and make sure that we came up with the same answers on both of the studies. And indeed we did. And so that's a little bit about how I built the model and tested it and then validated that as well. And so what we found, which was actually very interesting, and I want to break this down within the context of the kind of trading education and the claims that we hear a lot of the times, where what we tested was when a break and a retest occurs, what happens after when we set a trade? Is it going to reach the target or is it going to go someplace else? And if you've ever gotten stopped out but the target was hit anyway and you often wondered why, this probably is going to help answer that for you. So we found with those tests that yes, the target was reached. So we do a break and a reclaim, and then we hit a target, and it was reached between the six pairs. We averaged that about 53, almost 54% of the time. On JPY pair, it was a little bit lower at about 51%, but on the GBP, basically the British pound, it was a little bit higher at 56%. So if you think about it, if I were to make a claim, I could actually say, and it would be a fantastic headline, that across the British pound, when I do a break and a retest, it's going to reach my target TP about 56% of the time. And I think, yeah, that's probably enough to build an edge around. But that's really, so even the data said that, yeah, it reaches at 56% of the time. The add on to that is eventually. All right. And what it actually does, so if we look at this, and we were to say this is like a break and a retest, this is where we said it was going to reach or we set our trade. So maybe I went ahead and I said, okay, it closed above, and I would go ahead and I would place a trade. Maybe my entry would be here. I would hit the target, say my TP is here, and then my stop loss would be like, I don't think it's going to violate this level, for example. So it would look something like this, right? For example. All right. So what we found is that it hit this about first. So that was the initial target. So if I'm thinking price is going to take off and do this, it only did that about 10% of the time. But what it did is it reached the opposite level more often first. Okay, I think that's really the thing. The first destination was that it did this, and that was about 90% of the time. So I'm thinking price is going to do this, but maybe the better trade is to do this, to take this trade, right? So that was something that was very surprising when we looked at the data. And so that kind of begs the question of, is that initial, if I just make a claim and I said, like I said earlier with what our data showed with a GBP, right? That, oh, 56% of the time it reaches the target. It sounds fantastic. However, whenever you put it to the data, it doesn't really hold true, right? And so the question is not, does it really hold true, but is it tradable and can you make money from it? I think that's a fundamental question. So what we did is we took it a little bit farther and I said, let's randomize the data. And when we randomized it, it was barely this level that it actually reached the target 53% of the time. If I was to do a coin flip, I would have got there about 52% of the time, a little bit better than 52% of the time. So this claim was actually true, but it was actually not very much more. I could have done almost as well with just a coin flip, basically. All right, so what price actually does really after a reclaim. Remember, we're thinking that it's going to go this way, right? That we're going to go ahead and we had the peek through, closed above. Maybe we're thinking that, yeah, it went ahead and it broke through and then it's going to take off. So we're thinking it's going to go here. It does this. It doesn't do it first, all right? It does it first only 10% of the time. What price does is it reaches so it does retest actually about 82% of the time it does retest. It reaches a midpoint level at the opposite, and then it reaches what I call the far level on the opposite before it takes off up here. An interesting question is maybe this is not the trade, maybe this is, or maybe this is the trade, right? So that's why we do these studies, is to find out, okay, if this was not proven to be the edge, maybe this is the edge or maybe this is the edge. And that is, yeah, something to go ahead and put on the radar to test to see the initial thesis that we had really didn't prove true. But what if this proves true? Or what if that proves true? Then we find an edge, even though the initial thesis wasn't proven, basically, right? So, what does that mean? I think it means a couple of things. I think one of the things that it actually indicates is that direction is not the moral of the story. That we see a lot of the trading education and we see these claims made, and they're all around this one thing. Whoops, we're all around this one thing, which is the direction, right? It's all based on direction. This headline stat, that headline stat, IB, ICT, SMT, liquidity, support and resistance, master pattern, which ones have I left out? But this is only part of the story. The rest of the story is this right here. And this is really where my work begins. It takes this as a thesis, and then it goes ahead and it says, does it do it first? What happens? What does price actually do? This is what we heard that it does, but what does it actually do? And that's exactly what we said, is we heard that the break and the retest, it reaches the target, so on and so forth. But when we actually dug into the data and tested the raw bars, we saw price action act completely different. And so it really depends on these things in addition to this thing. It depends on, like, where do you enter and where does the move actually start, right? And then how much drawdown do you have to withstand, and can you withstand it? And then what does price actually do first? Right? Where does price go first? And then at what point do we actually decide that, yeah, I'm going to invalidate this? This is really not a good trade idea at all. So that's where, to me, the trade lives. It's not, this is part of the story and this is the rest of the story. So a couple things, if you want to check this out on your charts, is look at that. Don't look at it and cherry pick. Don't do that. But look at it like, okay, I'm going to look at this kind of critically and see, what does it actually do most of the time? How often does it really run clean? How often does it go lower than we thought it was going to go? And then you can find out for yourself and test all of this for yourself, because that's really what's important, is testing these things to see, does it really give you an edge, right? And so I would say, if you like this, then go ahead and stay tuned, because we run these tests every week. And if you want something and you have an idea and go, I kind of like this tested, let me know. And I'll go ahead and I'll get it on the schedule and we'll go ahead and we'll get it tested. If you have any questions or anything, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. And then I do a little bit deeper on this study and more on my Substack. That's called Myth versus Market at substack.com. Subscribe to more studies. I do one deep study a week. And yeah, if you like this, we'll see you in future studies.